It started with a knock on the door. Not a military parade, not a dramatic explosion, just a quiet tap, tap, tap. A teenage boy named Bob King answered it and found a Royal Signals officer standing on his doorstep. The captain had one question.
Would you be willing to help the government with some confidential listening work?
No big deal. Just a global war going on. Just some classified radio surveillance. Totally normal Tuesday. Now, if you're 16, living in a sleepy British town, and someone from military intelligence shows up asking for your help, what do? If you're Bob King, you say yes. And just like that, he became one of the youngest members of a secret group known as the Voluntary Interceptors. Their job? Tune in, listen, write everything down, and don't ask too many questions. If you like having kneecaps. By the time the Allies hit the beaches on D-Day, over 1,500 ham radio operators, many of them teenagers, were quietly intercepting Nazi messages from garden sheds and attic workshops across the country. No uniforms, no medals, just Morse code, headphones, and a whole lot of top-secret listening. Here's the wild part. Most of them didn't even know what they were listening to. Back in the 1930s, amateur radio was booming. It was the perfect hobby if you were curious, a little nerdy, and had a talent for building gadgets that made your parents nervous. These kids could copy Morse faster than most people could write their own names. And that's exactly what British intelligence needed. MI5 and MI6 were terrified that Nazi agents were transmitting messages from inside the UK. But military listening posts couldn't be everywhere, so someone had a brilliant idea. Why not use the amateurs? They already had radios, they already knew code, they worked for free, and best of all, they were everywhere. Enter Arthur Watts, president of the Radio Society of Great Britain. He got the call from Lord Sandhurst. We need a listening network, hundreds of stations, quietly. And Arthur, bless him, basically said, yeah, I know a guy. Actually, I know hundreds. The recruiting started in secret. Some were approached by military officers. Others got vague letters. One guy was tapped by his local police inspector, who casually asked if he'd like to do a bit of work for His Majesty's government, which is code for welcome to the most secret radio network in Europe. Now here's something most people don't know. When the war began in September 1939, all private radio transmitting equipment in Britain was impounded, shut down, off the air. The General Post Office ran a few direction-finding stations, but they weren't equipped to handle the kind of signals intelligence the war demanded. So MI8 did something bold. They made an exception for people who were very good at listening. Citizens who weren't conscripted and were proficient in Morse code were recruited as secret listeners. They were granted special permission to keep their receivers. No transmitting, just receiving. Most of these new recruits were men, but not all. Two of the earliest and most skilled women were Nell Corey, call sign G2YL, and Olive Myler, G3GH. They were already accomplished hams, and they could pull signals out of a noisy band like it was second nature. These weren't casual hobbyists. These were people trained by years of fiddling with poor signal propagation, fading skips, and home-built rigs with hot vacuum tubes. And here's the kicker. Their families had no idea. Some never found out, not even decades later. The volunteers were vetted, sworn to secrecy under the Official Secrets Act, and then assigned mysterious box numbers to report to. The most famous? Box 25 Barnet, which turned out to be a Victorian country house called Arkley View, where all those intercepted logs were quietly analyzed by very serious men with very thick glasses. The mission was simple: scan the shortwave bands, write down everything, and mail it in. At first, they were looking for Nazi spies, broadcasting from inside Britain, and they found almost none. The good news? The actual Nazi spy problem was quickly dealt with. The bad news? Now you've got hundreds of volunteers listening to static with nothing juicy coming through. But just when it started to feel like a massive waste of headphones, something strange happened. Encrypted messages started popping up, 5 character groups, weird rotating call signs, signals that sounded amateur, too amateur, as in trying really hard to sound like an amateur. It was fishy, and the VIs knew something was up. But what they didn't know, what no one told them, was that they had just stumbled onto something huge. They weren't listening to spies in the UK. They were listening to the German Secret Service, the Gestapo, the Abwehr, the SS, the whole alphabet soup of Nazi intelligence, right there, on the air. And the volunteers, those quiet nerds with headphones, were capturing it all. They didn't decode the messages. That was Bletchley Park's job. But they supplied the raw intercepts, tens of thousands of logs every day. And those logs, they helped win the war. Without the VIs, we wouldn't have pulled off Operation Mincemeat. We wouldn't have fed false intel to Nazi commanders. And we might not have pulled off the greatest bluff of the entire war, convincing Hitler the D-Day invasion would happen in Calais, not Normandy. Now, to be fair, the VIs didn't know that at the time. They just kept listening, day after day, copying code, logging traffic, sending it in. They had no clue what it meant. But someone at Box 25 always told them the same thing. Keep logging, it's important. And they did. They didn't talk about it. Not to friends, not to family, not even to each other. Some didn't tell their spouses until the 1980s. A few never told anyone. It wasn't until a BBC documentary aired in 1979, over 3 decades later, that the truth finally came out. Husbands turned to wives, wives turned to husbands, and kids everywhere learned that dear old dad wasn't just fiddling with a radio set during the war. He was spying on Hitler. Today, a few museums and exhibits finally recognize the voluntary interceptors. The RSGB has honored them with a display at Bletchley Park, but most of their names are still lost. Their logs were destroyed, their stories faded into static, which is why we're telling them now. Because they didn't do it for glory, they did it because someone asked. They weren't soldiers, they weren't spies, they were just hams, and they listened when it mattered most. Oh, and by the way, most of them didn't even know who they were listening to until the 1970s. They spent 6 years intercepting high-level Nazi transmissions without knowing what they were. That's next-level trust. Or maybe just next-level curiosity. Either way, they helped win a war with headphones, not rifles. And if that doesn't earn them a place in ham radio history, I don't know what does. Don't subscribe. Seriously, every video you watch these days ends with someone asking you to subscribe in order to help them. But this one's different. This channel is not about boosting an algorithm. It's about building a signal path between you and stories that deserve to be remembered. I'm more interested in helping you learn something new. And if I do it right, maybe even entertain you a little along the way. But hey, if you do happen to hit that button, maybe by accident, or maybe just because you're the kind of rebel who does the opposite of what you're told, that's okay with me too. As always, thanks for listening.